All right, it's always super fun having you up, Rob. Just before we crack on today, could you just remind everyone else and let me know, because I'm not 100% sure of all your background yet, so it's always fun to do these things. When did you start martial arts, and what's the journey been like for you so far?
It's been almost, it's getting close to 30 years ago that I started martial arts now. I started originally with karate and taekwondo. They were the first two black belts I got. And then my early teens, around 13, I then started studying Giuffrida, Jeet Kune Do, Kali, Silat, Arnis, Pan and Tukan, just a lot of the weapons martial arts. And then probably my early 20s, I probably gravitated more towards the combat sports, like the wrestling, boxing, kickboxing. I did a lot of grappling, kickboxing, in my teens, but probably did it more in a competitive capacity through my 20s. And yeah, so now I have an MMA gym that teaches a variety of martial arts.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that, because it's cool to see people on both sides of the fence. I know my coach Paul is able to float on both sides of those traditional martial arts and combat sports fence, because there's an interesting kind of battle that goes on with those sometimes, where the reality self-defense systems want to tell us that MMA is just a sport, or jiu-jitsu is just a sport, or Thai boxing is just a sport, but all those sports to me are like exactly how you sharpen your weapon to be ready for battle. And if you're not in those problem-solving violent environments, then you're never going to be able to problem-solve your way through violence when the time comes. So it's definitely it's interesting to watch people gravitate towards those things, and then have maybe someone on the traditional martial arts side maybe not think that someone who does mixed martial arts and fights is not a martial artist, which is kind of crazy for me.
Yeah, I think people tend to view martial arts as like this, like a hobby or something that's come up recently, but it's something that's quite human. We haven't yet discovered a culture or a time in history where martial arts was, wasn't in that culture. It's an anthropological phenomena, and I think particularly if you look at a lot of the martial arts techniques in a globe, if you look at, say the martial arts of Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, they're quite similar. The way they move and strike, in Thailand and Burma are quite similar. When you go to the Asian martial arts, and I suppose, people imagine it as some kind of hobby that you take up, or this new thing that's been going on for the last few months. But it's deep. It's in us. We haven't. Whenever we encounter a new tribe that hasn't been touched, they have spears. They undergo a kind of training in a similar way that lions wrestle with each other. Martial arts isn't just this hobby that you take up on the side. It's much deeper than that. Where it has a deep history. It has a deep value. There's also a military history, and like the modern innovations of guns have obviously developed military practice.
I like that talk of like when people start talking about like the history and how we all should do it, because I think some of the civilized fractures that we have in society, especially like a comfortable Western society that we have now, where the most dangerous thing for an 18 to 44-year-old right now is themselves. And we've got to ask ourselves, well, what are we going to do to fix that? And I think some of it might be going back to some of the behaviours and patterns we had before. Understanding ourselves a little bit more through confrontation and violence in a sport-like setting is going to build that resilience and that emotional regulation that we need. Not only that, like we're meeting up with our mates and play fighting every day. Like it's a nice connection to society as well. Like you're just meeting a bunch of friends, which is cool. So it answers a lot of problems that we have as well, besides violent ones.
Yeah, it seems that we seem to be well adapted for really high amounts of stress over small periods of time, like a combat situation, but we're now more in a world where we have a medium amount of stress over over very long periods of time. You know, you're worrying about this thing in the office, or you know, whether the Johnson account's going to come through, but and that tends to, I think, create suboptimal mental health conditions. And I think, making people play on the edge of danger, making people assess risks and engage in violence is actually quite a healthy thing to do.
Yeah, in moderation, of course. Which is cool. So you fought mixed martial arts. You're definitely a very adept grappler as well. What are some of the other things that you've competed in over the years?
I've competed in stick fighting. I've competed in most of the martial arts, most of the competitive martial arts. You know, I've tried to engage in the cultures and the different training methodologies, the variety of different martial arts, and I think to get the it's kind of the best way to get a perspective. In the same way that a jury may get a biased case from a defense lawyer and a prosecutor, and the jury's got to try and figure out the truth from two subjective positions. I think the martial arts very much work that same way, where none of them seem to possess this immutable truth. So they all have this subjectivity to them. So you need to, I suppose, observe all the different martial arts, the training methodologies, the techniques, and you've kind of got to extract what's common across all of them to try and get a more objective picture about the way that martial arts,
which comes back to the awesome trial and error thing that we do to learn things fast. Like in jiu-jitsu, it's hold training; in striking, it's situational sparring, and that's like a trial and error where you're trying to build skills under certain situations and defensive techniques, and then your competition is trial and error as well. Okay, well, I lost. Now I've got to come back and figure out why did I lose that game? What skills am I missing, and how can I fix this up? So, like from a martial artist point of view, if we get back to the point why we started talking about this, if all you're doing is postulating, if someone grabs me here, I do this. If someone attacks me with a knife, I do this. You've only sorted out so many of the problems. There's so many more problems that happen, that arise inside a fight, whether it be a striking sport, you've got lots of striking problems. A grappling sport, you've got all the grappling problems imaginable in a jiu-jitsu fight. And then on top of that, you have all the emotional problems that competition give you as well, which are far beyond any kind of maybe pantomimed thing you can come up in some kind of reality defense scenario. Say you walk in a room and then 3 guys are going to spar you at once and you fight your way out of it. Yeah, it's going to create you stress, but it's never going to be as real as that one guy that you're fighting, because your training partners are going to look after you, and so it's always going to be a little bit manufactured. And combat sports, I feel like, can fix that for you. So it's a problem-solving scenario, and I understand that it's different from real violence, but that's definitely something that you can intellectualize.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it seems the most, across all the different martial arts, the thing that seems to be common across the more effective ones seems to be live training. And the same way that, say, we can just come out with these theories all day. I can say, look, I could take you down this way, and you say, no, it wouldn't work. But it's like we need to subject that to some kind of live scrutiny, where we need to conduct an experiment where I try and do the move and you've got to try and stop me. And I think, it's a lot more comfortable to sit here and come out with theories and, people do that bit, but you have to, precisely as you've said, you've got to subject it to live training, and something's going to come out on top. But that, the live training and because the live takes in all the, it takes in the psychological element as well as the technical elements, the physicality and the tactics.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I do find, for myself, most of the people that I go talk to, that there's less maybe dogma inside of obviously Jeet Kune Do gyms, even sometimes the Bob Jones affiliated gyms that do a little bit of everything. They're not too bad. Definitely most mixed martial arts gyms, believe it or not, are actually quite dogma free, because they're all doing jiu-jitsu, judo, some kind of wrestling, They definitely mad if they're not Thai boxing, and definitely, you know, mad if they're not doing a little bit of boxing as well. And they generally have great respect for all those sports as well.
So yeah, it's similar to I think, yeah, athletes need to be a little bit dogmatic in the beginning, similar to, I suppose, you know, the way you'd be at, you know, school. But then I suppose once you undergo the tertiary education, then you've got to start to really question the tenets of things. You've got to undergo research. You know, there's a whole bunch of questions that haven't been answered yet.
Yeah, you need that fundamental foundation, an athletic stance that creates balance and an understanding of some basic rules that hopefully eventually you'll learn how to break at the right time as well. So that's, yeah, and we maybe even touched on it a little bit earlier today when talking amongst ourselves at the gym. It's like the best structure you can have is always going to be something that's just riddled with some fundamental concepts, and then how do we get students to then be creative, you know, without breaking those principles too far.
Yeah, how to be a good athlete and how to create a good athlete are two entirely different questions I'm sure you've experienced over your training life. And I think as you progress more, like I've become more of a coach as time goes on, you know, rather than saying like, how do I get good? I tend to like to look at athletes and think, what do they need to do to improve and get better? And I think, you know, rather than, you know, problem solving from myself outwards, I like to go like, okay, that's the particular pathology that athlete's going through. What do you need to, you know, you got to diagnose it, then you've got to, you know, produce something that's going to make them better. And it's, I mean, technically it's quite easy, but, you know, as I'm sure you've experienced, like mentally it's quite difficult because you can tell someone to adjust some sort of technique in the form, but if an athlete's doing something cognitively, which in competitions, you know, just as important as the technical aspects, you know, they may not be honest with themselves about, you know, the way they're thinking or their attitude towards the event, and then they've got to be honest towards you about that, and you yourself aren't perfect as well. You've got to try and kind of, you know, problem solve that out yourself as a coach. And I think, you know, like as you say, you know, you can theorize all the martial arts techniques, but you know, live combat, you know, involves the psychological aspect as well, and you can really quantify what good technique and bad technique is. But I think the whole mental side of it and the tactical side of it is definitely something that's, yeah, it's not focused on enough for sure, and it's the hardest one because it's the most difficult to quantify.
And you have to work on it too. Like there's a bunch of self-talk that you have to do to work on it. You have to expose yourself to stressful situations outside of competition that you might not do. And you know, the number one thing you have to do is you got to break down some of those belief systems. Oh, it's just a mental block. What am I going to do about it? Well, do something about it. Of course. Yeah. Okay, you got to put some pressure about it. You need to start talking to yourself in different ways. You might even have to write out a game plan. You might have to write out some positive affirmations that you use whilst training, after training. There's a whole heap of techniques that you can do, but the number one thing you can't do is you can't just hope for your mental attitude to get better.
That's right. And the expectations of athletes tend to be different. You know, if an athlete can't do the splits, then you go, look, you've got to stretch every day for a couple of years. Then you can look to do the splits. You know, that the athlete can really understand that. Or you say, look, you know, you want to squat some more weight. You know, if you say, look, if you want to add a fair bit more to your squat, you say, look, this is something that you have to be diligent at over a long period of time, and you're going to get small incremental results over a long period. But with the mental game, if someone says, you know, is there a way that I can think about things immediately that's going to make me mentally tougher? And you know, people think that the mental game has that kind of solution, but it's much more like the flexing or the doing the squats, where, you know, there's very small incremental improvements. Sometimes there's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Yeah. And yeah, people tend to think, you know, how can I think about things so I immediately become mentally tough? But it works the same as, you know, increasing your ability in a lift. You know, you do small incremental positive changes over large periods of time, and that's how you get from A to B. But it seems to be it seems to be widely accepted that's what you've got to do to get stronger or more flexible.
Yeah. And it can often be a cop out too on the other end. We can't forget that. Someone can go, oh, he just mentally beat me. Oh, I mentally beat myself, when actually your technique was rubbish. You know, like, and your defensive skills weren't good, or you didn't kick enough to win the Thai boxing fight, or you didn't punch enough to win the boxing fight, or you fought from guard the whole time and just got mashed and passed constantly. Yeah, exactly. You know. So there's all of that too, which is interesting, because that's what keeps me coming back, you know, coaching and thinking about myself too, right? Because we all want our students to level up and do better than we did before, and have greater support and things like that, which is one of the reasons why I love flying up people that I have respect for to help me out at tournaments and run seminars at the gym. There's nothing, you know, I can teach a single leg, but it's nice to have someone else teach a single leg with their details on it, and, you know, like, their different connections with people.
Everything's
I really love that.
Hasn't been said by everybody.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, which is super good, right? And I think people forget too, like, how important it is on your journey to build those relationships with other people every now and then. Because if you get stuck in your journey, whether it be at the beginning and you're trying to have your first fight, and there's a ton of people out there that have your first fight and that have been through that process. You need to talk to them. It's just like when you're starting to coach, it's nice to have other coaches as friends. So when you have issues with techniques or students or structure, you've got someone to talk to. If you want to be good at anything, those relationships are important. You can't come in with that single-minded, oh, it's a single person sport, you know, like, I can just treat people however I want. I'm just going to show up and train and people will look after me. It's just not how it happens.
And you often see coaches that got to where they were, you know, through a multidisciplinary approach, and they used a multidisciplinary approach to get to where they were, but then they, you know, quite often they'll assert to their students that they can't have a multidisciplinary approach. And I think it can be quite naive sometimes as well. You know, it's like sometimes the way that I'll explain things to my guys, like, I can tell that, you know, a good chunk of them get it, but some of them don't get it. And then someone else will use this other analogy, or they'll say, look, you know, the penny dropped for me when I thought about it this way. And it's like, I mean, to shut down that conversation because the information isn't coming from the head coach, I think it's a pretty egotistical way to think. You know, you need a variety of different perspectives in the gym. You need different schools of thought. You know, you need ideas to press upon each other and ideas to rise up on the top. But yeah, just suppressing, you know, the multidisciplinary approach is it's not the right direction. You definitely need multiple people in the gym, you know, multiple sources. Yeah, like even you know, to get good at, say, just sports science alone, like that's an endeavor. Like, you've got to read a lot of literature just to be familiar with you know, small pockets of sports science. You know, you've got to read a fair bit of the psychological literature to really try and grasp, you know, what can be going on in some of these athletes' heads. You know, so I think, you know, anyone that kind of shuts down any sort of multidisciplinary approach and doesn't create the sort of environment that you create, where there's, you know, these multiple streams. You know, you got to where you were with that approach, and you know, it
was a lot of trial and error. I mean, my first coach didn't even. I think the first 7 fights I had out of that gym, I think he was present for 2 of them. So, you know, like, it wasn't like a team that would go away and learn together and come back. You know, so it was real interesting. So then, you know, you got to trying to improve those systems along the way and do after reaction reviews was something I had from the military. It's just kind of like learning from all these different places, and I think, you know, everybody should be doing that. And it's like, man, maybe if you've got a guy that's got serious problems with your hands and you've trained him for 10 years, maybe he needs to book in with a boxing coach once or twice a year before he has his next pro MMA fight to help him out. And you see a lot of the top level guys doing that, but people often are worried about then losing that guy completely. Man, you're not going to lose that guy completely for doing 2 mornings of pads somewhere else. What you may lose them if they don't keep getting better. You may lose them if you deny them the opportunity to learn from other places. It's definitely a conversation that's not had super well with those high level athletes. And I think for anyone who is an amateur level athlete out there, to don't think that's the best thing for you at that time of your career yet. You may need to find extra one-on-ones outside of your club's class times to be able to do that decentralized training effectively without rocking the boat. Again, coming back to relationships, you need to have a good relationship with your coach and talk about these things and make sure that you're playing your part as the athlete, not the diva.
And I mean, we can never know what the many of the great founders of the martial arts truly thought, but I'd like to think that if those guys were still around in the light of new sports science and innovations and training techniques and equipment, that they wouldn't have stayed the same. And I think like a lot of the traditional martial arts, they like to be in line with the founder. They say this is how it was done 300 years ago. We're going to keep it the same, but the founder that created that martial arts, if they had access to the information that we have now, even regarding diet, nutrition, cognitive science, that they probably wouldn't have kept it the same. People tend to find it's disrespectful to say that things should be other than the traditional way, but I like to think that a lot of those founders, would have liked to see some kind of progression after their death. And I think that in this, like the way that education would normally go is you get to this point where you need to undergo research, where you need to try and answer the questions. You need to, try and grow from the things that you were taught yourself. And different. You find that your students would tend to go down different roads. Some of them will be leaning towards a particular area of martial arts, or some will like a particular breathing exercise or something like that. But in the gym, you need those different schools of thought, because then everyone can collaborate together, and then you're going to have the guy, the physio guy in the gym who's going to be great at giving the guys some advice on rehab. You're going to have
I always like to try and encourage that group learning environment, and especially for jiu-jitsu over the years, I've always looked, when I've had one really good guide, to try and get them to run some classes. When I was fighting, that was important so I could get training time in, but it was also important so I could get different ideas in. So I wasn't doing a half guard escape the same way all the time. I was like, well, how do you do it? And then I would learn from that. And I've kept that happening ever since, when there's been someone ready to step up and take that role on. I think sometimes people are frightened of people taking that role on because they think they're going to lose control over their club. But I encourage it. I think having a group learning environment is really important. Just like I think it's important to have more than one coach. I like to have different coaches for different skills, but also for different personalities. Like one guy might be a wrestle jitsu kind of guy, another guy might be a little bit more flowy and trying to feed off other people's energy. And I think it's nice to learn from both those schools.
Yeah, well, one of the most, some people go, look, this is what the martial art looks like, and I want to make what I do as close to that. But you look at even in a short period of time, from the early to 90s to now, the evolution of the martial arts, and although we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and there was a lot of amazing guys back then, but I think that, let's say 100 years from now, pretty much everything that we're doing now is going to be done better. The nutrition knowledge is probably going to be better. The techniques are going to be better refined. Whether the rate of evolution in martial arts will stay constant or whether it tapers off, who knows? But I think that, rather than saying what are the guys doing now, I think the big question.
One of the reasons too is better recording, right?
Yeah.
But we used to have to draw pictures in a book,
yeah,
and then it would get passed around. Like you look at some of the ordinary pictures that they might have had in the Kodokan of techniques, and now it's recorded on YouTube, and we've got access to it, and we can refine it, and it's just like it shoots out there. And now, power to them. You got guys like Lachlan Giles tearing up the absolutes, and then what does he do a couple of weeks later? Here's my leg lock system. Come at me, guys. And that again is pretty cool too, right? Because he's like, okay, this is what I won with. I'm going to put it out there, and then I'm going to try and win again next year. That culture in in jiu-jitsu of people who do that. That's breaking down walls, and it's fun to see. It's fun to see.
Yeah, like technological innovations like YouTube have injected steroids into the evolution of things like jiu-jitsu, and there are some small arguments out there, how things like YouTube harm jiu-jitsu, but overall it's been a positive thing. Jiu-jitsu is in a good place now because of the internet.
Oh no,
there's definitely, I mean, there's some, but I don't know, I think that, like I say, I think instructors, always give the advice not to have an ego, but I've come, I think when people say, look, I'm the only source of information, I have the immutable truth, I know all the answers, I think, a lot of martial arts is becoming aware of your own ignorance and becoming aware that you don't have all the answers and you don't possess the immutable truth, and rather you've got to come out with ways to deal with your own ignorance. And
well, that self-awareness is important, right? And that's one of the reasons I travel and train, because sometimes you'll get called out on that by particular coaches and people like, hey man, no, you can't be thinking like that. Get off your ass, do some more training. Here, let me fix that for you, or whatever it is. Or man, like someone called me out recently for not studying enough video footage, and I immediately 5 times the amount of video footage that I watch, where now I make sure I watch some jiu-jitsu every single day, because they couldn't believe that I was only watching jiu-jitsu like once a week. So again, and hopefully that makes me a better coach.
That's right.
Because of it. And
usually, like, I mean, I know myself, the things that I've often needed to progress were in the style that I didn't like, and when I've sort of grasped, this thing that a style that I didn't like, I've needed to discard 90% of it, but the thing that I needed was in this style that perhaps for a period of time I was like, I don't like that for this reason or that reason, and then once I've I actually adopted it, and discarded a good portion of it, a lot of times there's some really useful stuff in there. But I think that process of being wrong over and over again tends to change your attitude, where you go, look, things done this way, I don't like them done that way. Then you go, well, in fact, the thing that I need to get better, maybe I need some of that, and then and that process happens so often that sometimes you have to learn, listen to 9 techniques that perhaps are less effective to find that extra technique. But I think, the means that you have to judge the good ones from the bad ones are probably the thing, which distinguishes the student from the people that are probably researching the martial arts and the students of the martial arts that way.
Yeah, magic. I think we've had a pretty good talk today, but I'm going to take like a little bit of a left turn now. It's something that I tend to ask people a lot, because we get caught up around martial arts being for fighting a lot, which I think is great, because fighting and play fighting is super fun regardless of what combat sport or martial art that you do. What's one of the best things that you've got from combat sports and martial arts training for you over the past 30 years?
There's a lot, but I would, that's a long list. But I'd say that one of the lessons that I think people learn first in martial arts when you watch people train, because I mean it probably sounds a bit airy-fairy but I think you can tell a fair bit about people's characters by the way they train. I think one of the things that happens with people try and do something when they start out, and then they try and do a move, they stuff it up, and they get angry with themselves, and they go, oh, I'm tired today, or whatever. But you get to this period where you stuff up the move, then you go again, then you stuff it up and you go again. You don't stop and you go, this is the reason why I'm stuffing it up, or I'm a bit slow today, or I've only got more sleep, my ankle's a bit sore. And we got it pretty good in the martial arts, like if we were doing gymnastics and we had to do a double backflip or something, it may be a few years before we get to do the move once. Most of the moves we do in martial arts, you can actually do the move the same night that you learn the move.
I like that. Ownership, because that's a skill that people probably wouldn't recognize. And like, imagine giving that skill to your child doing martial arts early on, where it's like, okay, we're going to reward you for coming at the beginning. And then eventually I tell them, no, actually you don't get the next belt until you take ownership over being coachable and fixing these these problems. And like the worst thing a parent could do then is let their kid quit. Don't let them quit. Don't let them quit because they don't like it anymore. Keep them in there to do those things. If they're between 0 and 14 years old, you have the autonomy to keep that kid going to training because it's good for them. Just like learning an instrument or brushing their teeth, keep them at it because they'll learn ownership, you know, along with all the other wonderful things. But man, that ownership, I reckon, is like a skill we could all use.
That's right. If you do well, it's your fault. If you don't do well, it's your fault. That's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find that tends to be one of the first lessons. You know, like we all stuff up a lot. We all make a lot of mistakes. But you know, some people that they attempt something, they make a mistake, and then they go through this period of analysis. Oh, the reason I was doing this, and sorry. But like, you know, if you mess up, you just go after it again. You know, and that seems to be the one that, you know, people tend to get first in martial arts, and they immediately apply it to their life. You know, we stuff things up every day. You can either like mope around and try and analyze why things played out that way, or you can just get back into it. You know, and martial arts seems to be a good tool for developing that kind.
And
of
you can
system.
lose that. You can lose that over time too. Like sometimes you lose that ownership, and it comes back. Like I catch myself over time. Hold on. You could be complaining about that, but 100%, whatever it was, you know, like it's your responsibility to fix it and responsibility to own that that's why it's happened. You know, and that it really is critical thinking. I put most of that down to combat sports and like losing and every time coming back, taking 100% ownership. And maybe because I didn't have the best coaches when I started out, it helped me take 100% ownership because nobody else was helping me. You know, so that maybe even reinforced that ownership. So, you know, maybe if your coach can't make it to that jiu-jitsu tournament, go compete anyway and see how you're going to do and take full ownership over your results and everything else, not the fact that your coach wasn't there to support you that day. Okay, it's nice to have them when they are, but maybe you got to go swim for yourself.
That's right. And it's always odd to me how people try to develop their character by, you know, isolating themselves, taking a vow of silence, and you know, sitting on the high side of a hill for 3 months. You know, like if you really want to get to know who you are, you've got to study yourself in interaction with the world. You know, like your level of the kind of honesty that you're talking about, or you know, if you've got to put yourself in a bad or stressful situation to really know who you are. You know, like I think, you know, as much as you know, meditating on the side of the hill is, you know, useful and important, I think that, you know, you're going to find out about yourself very quickly when you put yourself under pressure, and that's done constantly in martial arts. You know, there's not many places where you can rock up and go, all right, I want to be plunged into a fight and flight situation while being entirely safe, and then it's not going to, you know, like almost everyone thinks they're going to do well, but none of us do well the first couple of times that happens, and then you immediately learn some things about yourself. You make some adjustments, and then you rock up. There's a safe environment again, fight and flight, and then you can start to make those incremental changes towards your character. And I think studying yourself in hardship, in interaction with the world, is a much better way of getting to know yourself than the more modern. Than the more modern way, you know, of self-discovery. You know, I think,
and it's done through suffering too, right?
Exactly.
Because it's not just the physical suffering that people might be thinking of. It's done through that physical suffering, the emotional suffering, and every emotion's different, right? There's the suffering of fear. There's the suffering of frustration. There's the suffering of entitlement. You know, all these things are going to happen to you inside your martial arts journey that are really going to question whether you're going to be there or not. So there's suffering of persistence, you know.
And well, it's an old lesson. I mean, because it's like, I mean, because modern culture it seems that, you know, like luxury and comfort are the you know, what we're moving towards. But it's if you, you know, and you can purchase you know, luxury and comfort with money, but as far as skills go, you can only purchase skills with suffering. Like if you want to run 5 kilometers faster, you have to pay with suffering to obtain that ability. The only price for improving your skills tends to be suffering or diligence. You know, what you know, not just martial arts. If someone wanted to become
I love that.
a doctor or something, you know, and it's one of those things where like you can you know, like I think martial arts has to persist in being the thing that you can't purchase, you know, and it's, if you want to acquire it, you have to pay the price. You got to pay the iron price.
Yeah.
For
the price is suffering, and
Yeah.
I like that, and that probably should be a Rob Giuffrida quote. We'll just copyright that right there now. The price to pay for anything worth having is suffering, and
it's a great joy.
You know, and on the end of that suffering, there is great joy and achievement from the end of that, and not only that, but purpose as well. And I've had this discussion with people before, like if you find a person with lack of purpose, you'll find depression. You know,
and you know, if you pay the gold price for something, if you lose it, you can't acquire it back easily. But if you have the skills to acquire something, if you lose the thing you've acquired, you can use your skills to acquire it back. So, you know, I mean, paying the iron price for your skills is a much better route than just purchasing luxury in your life with gold, you know?
Yep.
That's right.
I love that. That's good talk. We might wrap it up there because
Marvelous.